In the year 1650, Londoners woke each morning not to birdsong or church bells, but to a stench so overwhelming that many believed it carried death itself through the air. Before breakfast was prepared or shops were opened, the city announced its condition through smell alone, a thick mixture of human waste, rotting animals, stagnant water, and uncollected corpses that clung to streets and homes alike. What makes this moment unsettling is that this was not a sign of crisis or disaster, but the normal beginning of an ordinary day. People stepped outside already accustomed to covering their faces, breathing shallowly and moving quickly, because the smell was unavoidable and everywhere. London in 1650 did not hide its decay, it breathed it openly, and every morning reminded its inhabitants that survival in the city meant learning to live alongside filth that never truly disappeared. The source of the smell was woven into daily life because London had grown faster than its ability to manage human waste or death. Sewers, as we imagined them, did not exist, and most waste was thrown directly into streets, open drains, or the river, where it collected overnight and returned with the morning air. Slaughterhouses operated close to homes, leaving behind blood and remains that attracted insects and animals, while overcrowded burial grounds leaked decay into the soil and water. The poor suffered most, packed into narrow alleys where waste had nowhere to go, but even the wealthy could not fully escape the city's odor. Disease followed these conditions closely, spreading quietly through contaminated water and air, yet people understood illness through smell rather than science, believing foul air itself carried death. Each morning reinforced the fear that breathing deeply could be dangerous. Despite this, London continued to function because its people adapted to conditions that would seem unbearable today. Markets opened as usual, trades continued, and families raised children in environments where filth was constant and unavoidable. Smell became background rather than warning, something endured rather than questioned, shaping how people understood health, cleanliness, and fate. The city's endurance depended not on sanitation, but on tolerance, and that tolerance came at a cost measured in shortened lives and constant sickness. What history often overlooks is that London's rise was built on the daily resilience of people who woke to the smell of decay and carried on regardless. In 1650, the city did not just smell like death every morning, it reminded its inhabitants that living in London meant accepting conditions that slowly consumed them, one breath at a time. As the morning wore on, the smell that greeted Londoners at dawn did not fade so much as transform, shifting with the heat, movement, and activity of the day. Horse traffic churned waste into the streets, open drains warmed under the sun, and river tides pushed yesterday's refuse back toward the banks, ensuring that the city's odor followed people wherever they went. What made this especially cruel was that few understood the true cause of disease, so effort was focused on masking the smell rather than removing its source. Herbs were carried in pockets, fires burned in homes to cleanse the air, and windows were kept shut even in summer, trapping filth inside living spaces. These habits offered comfort but little protection, and illness continued to move silently through households, striking children and the elderly first. The city smelled alive in the worst possible way, constantly reminding its people that decay was not an event, but a condition. Over time, the smell shaped how Londoners thought about morality, order, and responsibility, because filth was seen as a reflection of social failure as much as physical neglect. The poor were blamed for dirt that the city itself produced, while authorities struggled to impose rules on a population already overwhelmed by growth and poverty. Efforts to clean streets were inconsistent and temporary, undone each night by the same systems that created the mess in the first place. Yet even as the smell persisted, life went on with remarkable determination, because stopping was never an option. People married, worked, argued, and hoped within an environment that constantly threatened their health. London in 1650 survived not because it was clean or safe, but because its people learned how to live with conditions they could not change. Each morning, the smell returned as a reminder that endurance, not comfort, defined urban life in a city still learning what progress truly required. As years passed, the smell of death that greeted London each morning became so familiar that many no longer noticed it unless it suddenly changed, because a new scent often meant a new danger. An unusually sweet odor could signal a body decomposing nearby, while an overwhelming heaviness in the air suggested sickness spreading through a neighborhood. People learned to read the city through smell, using it as a warning system in a world without medical understanding or reliable public health. Children grew up recognizing these signs instinctively, absorbing the knowledge through experience rather than instruction. This constant exposure hardened the population, dulling sensitivity not only to smell but to suffering itself, as illness and early death became accepted parts of life. London's mornings did not shock its residents, but quietly trained them to expect loss as routine. What history rarely emphasizes is how deeply this environment shaped behavior and belief across generations. Cleanliness became associated with morality and class, even though the causes of filth were structural rather than personal. The wealthy attempted to distance themselves from decay through space and privilege, yet disease crossed those boundaries with ease, reminding everyone that no one truly escaped the city's condition. Over time, pressure mounted for change, not because of compassion alone, but because the cost of inaction became impossible to ignore. The smell that once defined London's mornings slowly forced recognition that endurance had limits and that survival required more than tolerance. In 1650, the city still lived with death in the air, but within that unbearable routine grew the realization that survival required more than endurance. By the middle of the century, the smell that once marked every London morning had become a silent measure of the city's strain, revealing where growth had outpaced control. Neighborhoods near the river suffered most, as waste and refuse collected overnight and returned with the tides, ensuring that decay never truly left the city. Residents learned to adapt their routines, opening shops later, moving quickly through certain streets, and avoiding areas known for sickness, even if they could not explain why. These adaptations were practical rather than hopeful, shaped by the understanding that conditions would not improve quickly, if at all. The city's odor was no longer just unpleasant, but instructive, guiding behavior in a landscape where danger was invisible. Despite this, London continued to expand, drawing more people into an environment already struggling to support those within it. Crowding intensified the problem, layering new waste onto old and increasing the spread of disease through shared spaces. Death became common enough that it lost its power to disrupt daily life, absorbed into routine as something expected rather than feared. Yet beneath this acceptance, a quiet tension grew, because even endurance has limits. The smell that once seemed unavoidable began to provoke anger and demands for change, especially after outbreaks of illness made clear the connection between filth and survival. London in 1650 did not yet possess the knowledge to solve its problems, but its people were slowly learning that tolerance alone could not sustain a city forever. As frustration grew, the smell of death became more than a physical presence, turning into a symbol of neglect that people could no longer ignore. Complaints reached local authorities, not always with the expectation of improvement, but as expressions of desperation from those who had endured long enough. Attempts at regulation appeared in scattered forms, rules about waste disposal, street cleaning, and burial practices, yet enforcement remained weak and inconsistent. Each night erased the progress of the day, returning the city to the same conditions by morning. Still, these early efforts mattered because they marked a shift in thinking, an acknowledgement that filth was not simply fate, but a problem created by human systems. London's transformation would take generations, but the smell that defined its mornings played a crucial role in forcing that change.
It reminded people daily of the cost of inaction, shaping attitudes toward health, responsibility, and urban life itself. The city's endurance depended not on sanitation, but on eventually responding to it, even without full understanding. In 1650, London still smelled like death every morning, but within that unbearable routine grew the realization that survival required more than endurance. As the century moved forward, the memory of those mornings lingered even when conditions slowly changed, because the experience had shaped how Londoners understood their city and their place within it. The smell of death had taught them that growth without care carried consequences, and that endurance alone could not protect future generations. Families who survived the worst years passed down habits formed in filth, caution with water, suspicion of certain streets, and instinctive awareness that